They said the Castillo had a heartbeat. If you stood close enough to the stone walls at night, you could feel it, a slow, hollow thump beneath your palm, like a trapped heart that never stopped beating. Back in 1784, when the Spanish flag still hung stiff in the humid wind over St. Augustine, Colonel Rafael Martí arrived at the fort with his young wife, Isabella. She was no more than 20, pale, quiet, and too delicate for the heavy air of Florida's coast. Her family had sent her from Cadiz to marry the colonel, a man twice her age, already stiffened by duty and secrets. The soldiers whispered that she smiled too rarely, that her eyes always seemed to be looking at something far away. Raphael loved his uniform more than her. He loved the echo of his boots in the corridors, the polished barrels of his cannons, the respect his name commanded. Isabella, in her silk gowns and soft hands, was an ornament, something to complete the picture. But nights in the Castillo were long, and loneliness can grow teeth. That was when Captain Miguel Abella came into her life. He was younger, barely 30, with a quiet manner that made men trust him and women notice him. He was assigned to oversee supplies and repairs, which often brought him to the colonel's quarters. One evening, while Isabella sat by the small window brushing her hair, Miguel brought a ledger for her husband to sign. Raphael was gone on patrol. Miguel hesitated, then bowed politely. She asked if he'd like tea. That was all it took. Their conversations began about books, the sea, the places they missed. He'd been born in Havana, and she'd never seen the ocean until her voyage to the New World. When he spoke of the color of the Caribbean, she smiled for the first time in months. Soon the tea turned into letters, passed in secret between chapel visits and corridors. Then came touches, quick, trembling, and always half afraid. She began wearing a perfume she'd brought from Spain, white jasmine, faint and powdery. The scent lingered in her room, in her hair, in the folds of her letters. Miguel said he could find her anywhere by that scent alone. But one afternoon, that scent betrayed them. The colonel returned early from a meeting with the governor. He stopped by Miguel's office, tired and irritated. Miguel stood to salute, and in that moment, Raphael caught the faintest trace of Jasmine. He said nothing. That night, Isabella thought her husband seemed unusually calm. He ate little, asked no questions, and kissed her hand before bed, something he hadn't done in months. 2 days later, Isabella and Miguel disappeared. The colonel told the garrison that his wife had sailed home to Spain, sick and homesick, and that Captain Abella had been sent to Cuba on confidential orders. No one questioned it, not openly. The colonel's word was law, and his eyes carried a warning. Months passed, then years. By the time new officers took command of the Castillo, both names, Isabella Martí and Captain Abella, had faded into rumor. But strange things began happening in the lower quarters. Guards reported hearing a woman crying softly through the stone walls. Others said they smelled perfume, jasmine, drifting through the dungeon when no one was there. Sometimes in the quiet before dawn, footsteps echoed through sealed corridors. And once, a young sentry swore he saw a woman in white standing by the old courtyard. Her face was turned toward the sea. When he called out, she vanished, leaving behind only the faintest scent of flowers. 50 years later, when the fort was being restored under new command, a laborer struck an odd patch in the dungeon wall. The mortar there was fresher, smoother. They pried at it. Behind the bricks was a narrow, hidden chamber, barely wide enough for 2 people to stand. Inside were 2 skeletons, their arms tangled together. Some said they were chained, others said they had been buried alive, sealed into the wall. When they pulled down the last bricks, a rush of air escaped, thick, old, and faintly sweet like dried jasmine. The room was closed again after the discovery, but from that day, no worker would stay past sunset. Tools went missing, doors slammed on their own, and shadows flickered where no light should reach. A priest was called to bless the site. He prayed, sprinkled water, and told the men not to speak of what they'd found. But the scent remained. Even now, visitors say that if you walk alone through the fort at night near the old dungeon, you'll feel the air change, colder, stiller. You might catch the smell of flowers, too, faint to be real. Some have seen her, they say, a young woman in a white dress, hair dark as night, drifting through the arches like mist. Her eyes are empty, but her hands reach out as if searching for someone. Others claim they've heard the echo of two voices, one whispering in Spanish, the other answering softly before fading into the walls. The Castillo still stands, its stones hard and silent. Tourists walk where soldiers once marched. Children laugh where prisoners once prayed. But those who know the story, the real story, always stop near the dungeon door. They place a hand on the cold stone. Sometimes they swear it trembles. And if the night air is still enough, they say you can hear her sigh, a sound caught between love and sorrow. The scent comes next, always the same. White jasmine. Soft, sweet, and gone too soon.
Veronica first met Adrian in the cramped, cluttered lab of Dr. Seth Hawthorne. He was brilliant, restless, and impossibly kind in a way that made her chest ache when he smiled. She had wandered in that afternoon, curious about the strange lights and humming machines, and found herself watching him work. His hands were steady as he adjusted the small, humming teleporter prototype, and when he looked up and caught her gaze, it felt as if the world had slowed down. They fell into each other quickly, like two stars colliding in a dark sky. Adrian was cautious at first, distracted by his experiments, but Veronica didn't mind. She would sit for hours beside him, reading or sketching, while he spoke softly about atoms and molecules, and things she only half understood. Her laughter became something he chased when the lab was silent. Everything about them was fast and fragile, and maybe that was what made it so real. But the experiments took their toll. Adrian had been working on a teleportation project. He dreamed of breaking boundaries, of changing the world, and he believed, with the sort of devotion only the lonely or the obsessed have, that it was worth everything. Veronica tried to stay patient, tried to be the grounding voice he needed. Then came the accident. It was quick, almost unreal. Adrian had miscalculated something, a single small variable. The machine pulsed, the lights flickered, and in the blink of an eye, Adrian was gone. Or rather, he was there, and yet he wasn't. Veronica rushed to the machine. She found him slumped in the corner, trembling, his skin already beginning to change. His voice shook, a strange, buzzing tone underneath it. The man she loved was fading, twisting into something unnatural. At first, she refused to believe it. She told herself it was shock, a temporary mutation, something that could be reversed. She tried everything. She cleaned his wounds, she fed him, she argued with him, pleaded with him, begged him not to go further. But Adrian's brilliance had always carried a shadow, the part of him that craved discovery, the part that longed for power over life itself, had awakened in the worst way. The transformation was slow, grotesque. Limbs stretched and shriveled in unnatural ways, skin became mottled, eyes bulged. A buzzing followed him everywhere, a sound that made her stomach turn. And still, he reached for her. Veronica loved him in that moment. She loved the man he had been, the soul that had whispered poems and held her hand in quiet dark corners of the lab. But the thing he was becoming, she could not love that. One night, Adrian pulled her toward the machine again. He wanted her to enter, to merge, to share his evolution. His eyes were wild, the man she adored trapped behind a mask of ambition and mutation. She fought. Her arms flailed, her voice cracked. "No, Adrian, this isn't love, this is madness." He hesitated, if only for a second, and she pushed him away. And in that instant, the horror of what he had become pressed against her chest like ice. The final transformation was unbearable. By the time she could see him clearly, he was no longer human. Wings buzzed against the walls, a tiny, malformed face looked back at her. The brilliance, the warmth, the man she loved all gone, replaced by instinct and hunger. And yet, there was still Adrian. "Do it," he whispered in the hum of wings and broken syllables. "I can't stop." Veronica's hands shook. She felt vomit rise in her throat. She loved him too much to let him suffer. She aimed, she hesitated, and then she ended him. The wings stilled, the buzzing stopped, silence filled the lab. She collapsed to the floor, cradling the lifeless form that was both Adrian and not. She rocked back and forth, sobbing until she could no longer feel tears. Hours passed. The world outside the lab carried on, oblivious. The streetlights flickered. The hum of the city mingled with the memories of a love that had turned monstrous. And then a thought froze her blood. The possibility, whispered by the fleeting hints in the machine's readings, gnawed at her mind. What if she carried part of him still? What if life had found a way to slip past death, carried through her? She couldn't move, couldn't think. The fear, the grief, and the love pressed down on her chest, a weight that made every breath a struggle. Days blurred. Veronica stayed in the lab, cleaning, fixing, and avoiding mirrors. She left the house only when necessary. Friends called, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't say the words, the life she had known. The warmth of Adrian's hands, the laughter, the hope had been replaced with a quiet terror that hummed just beneath her skin. The lab became a mausoleum. Machines she could not bear to touch gathered dust. And every night, in the corner of her vision, she swore she saw movement, a shadow that was too quick, a flutter that made her heart seize. She wondered if it was him, the man she had loved, the monster he had become, or something new, something worse, born from a love that refused to die. Veronica never stopped remembering. The way he laughed when she teased him, the softness of his hands, the excitement in his eyes when discovery seemed close, and the horror of what his eyes looked like in the end. The wings, the buzzing, the twisted plea for mercy. It was a love story that should have had a beginning and an end. Instead, it had a corpse and a question that haunted her every waking moment. And somewhere, deep inside her, she feared that it wasn't over. That love, like science, finds a way.
Minnie Quay was 15, small and quiet, with eyes that seemed too big for her face. She lived in Forester, Michigan, a town cradled by the waters of Lake Huron, where fishing boats bobbed on the waves and the air always smelled faintly of salt and smoke. Her parents, James and Mary Ann Quay, kept a close watch on her. They were proud, practical people, grounded in routines and rules, and they thought many too young for the world outside their small home. They did not understand the longing in her chest. It began with a sailor. No one in town knew much about him. He came and went with the boats that creaked in the harbor. He had a soft voice that made her heart lift and a smile that lingered in her dreams. Minnie fell hard, quickly, the kind of love that leaves your stomach full of butterflies and your nights restless. Her parents forbade it. They scolded her when she lingered by the docks, warned her that sailors were dangerous and fleeting. But their warnings only made her cling to him more, in her thoughts and in the secret corners of her heart. One morning, word spread through the town like wildfire. The sailor's boat had sunk somewhere out on the lake. People whispered it happened suddenly, in the dark, under a sky so gray it felt like the world itself mourned. Minnie could not stop thinking about him. She remembered the last time he left, the way his eyes had lingered on hers, and how her parents had forced her to stay inside, refusing to let her wave goodbye. The grief was sharp, slicing into her like ice against bare skin. Days passed, but she could not rest. One afternoon, she found herself babysitting her infant brother in the quiet house. The baby's soft cries, the rocking of the cradle, could not drown the longing or the ache. She left. She walked down the dusty streets toward the water. The wind tugged at her hair. The sun reflected off the lake like broken glass. People sitting outside the Tanner house, the small inn where travelers rested, waved at her. She waved back, smiling faintly. Then their expressions changed. The warm greetings twisted into horror as Minnie reached the edge of the water. Without a word, she stepped in. The cold lapped at her ankles. She moved further, her skirts wet and heavy. She walked until the water swallowed her, until the lake seemed to take her into its silent, endless depths. No one stopped her. Some claimed they called her name, shouted warnings, but it was like she had become part of the lake itself. The water closed over her, and then there was nothing. The town whispered about Minnie Quay after that. Some said she drowned herself out of love, that she still waited for the sailor who would never return. Others whispered darker things, that she became something else, haunting the beaches, drawing the lonely and the curious toward the water. Children playing near the shore swore they saw a girl in wet white dresses trailing along the edge of the sand. Sometimes she laughed, a sound both sweet and hollow, echoing in the wind. Sometimes she called out, asking if anyone had seen a sailor or if someone would come back with her. People said she watched the boats at night, a shadowy figure moving just beyond the reach of the lamplight. Some who wandered too close to the water reported being pulled toward the depths by unseen hands, their cries lost in the waves. Others were lucky. They saw only her eyes, wide and waiting, filled with sadness that made them want to turn back and run. Her grief, her longing, had become something that could reach out across time and water, touching anyone who came too close. Minnie's parents were left with silence. James would sit for hours on the porch, staring at the lake, never speaking. Marianne wandered the house, muttering, half in prayer, half in despair. They never found closure, never understood fully what had happened that day, only that the girl they had raised was gone. Over the years, the stories grew. Travelers wrote letters to nearby towns warning of the girl who waits by the water. Young girls were told never to wander alone to the lake,
and boys were warned that curiosity could be deadly. Some nights, when the wind is high and the waves crash against the rocks, you can see her. Her wet dress clings to her form, her hair dark and tangled, her eyes wide with a hunger that is not entirely human. She moves along the shoreline, silent, except for the occasional whisper of a name, the longing for something or someone she will never have. It is said that she has a choice. Sometimes she waits, staring out over the lake, her sorrow deep enough to break your heart from afar. Sometimes she drags the living down into the cold water, letting them share the fate she could not escape. And still, she waits. For the sailor who never returned. For the love that the world would not allow. For the life that ended before it began. Even now, if you walk along the beaches of Forrester at twilight, you may hear her soft singing, a song of longing and loss. Her feet leave no footprints in the sand, and yet the water ripples as if something has passed. The wind carries the faintest scent of sea and salt, and a feeling that someone, somewhere, is watching, waiting. The legend says she is still there, Minnie Quay, the girl who loved too deeply, too young, and lost too soon. And some nights, if you listen carefully, the lake answers her, whispering back.